In 2008, I worked at a retail clothing store with my girlfriend Chelsea. We were both 18 years old, and we tried to work as many shifts together as possible to maximize our time together because she was still in school. My grandfather had recently purchased a Dodge Sprinter van for his business, and my car was being serviced overnight, so I got to drive the van. Chelsea and I loved the nights we got to take the van, because it usually had the back seats installed and the tinted windows meant we could have some privacy, which is great for teens who still live at home. That night, we only had one row of seats in the back, and it was the row just behind the driver and passenger. Chelsea and I parked near each other like we always did, and worked our evening shift closing the store with a few of our coworkers. We all leave together, and I help the manager lock up because the glass doors need to be aligned properly for the lock to engage. It's early March in Pennsylvania, and it's still very cold outside, so Chelsea usually starts her car to warm it up, and then sits with me as my car warms up. When I get to the vehicle, her car is idling and she's already in the van. I don't even realize that I still have the keys and I never unlocked the doors. She sits with me chatting for a while. She sits on my lap, and we kiss in the front seats, and we decide it's too late and too cold to have a little fun in the back. Every night, we drive home separately from work while talking on the phone. She usually gets home first, and I stay on the line while she walks up her long driveway in the dark. That night, I made it home first for some reason, and I knew I had a lot of stuff to carry in, so when I'm close to home, I tell her I'll call her in a little bit. She asks me to stay on the line because she's almost home and doesn't like walking past the dark bushes next to her driveway. I stay on the phone and fumble with all my things I'm carrying out of the van. I know I locked and armed the van because as I was using the key fob to lock the vehicle, I dropped a few things while struggling to keep the phone to my ear. The motion lights have illuminated the whole area, so I'm able to see everything that I dropped. We both make it inside safely, and we also decide not to stay on the phone because she had school in the morning. I begin to doze off almost immediately in my bedroom. I lived with my grandparents who built a house to accommodate my grandfather's aging parents suffering from Alzheimer's, so they didn't have to go in a home. The driveway runs parallel to a daylight basement that has two garage doors, an entrance door, and the French doors to my bedroom. I'm falling asleep as all of the motion lights finally turn off, and now my room is completely dark. It wasn't 20 minutes later when I'm jarred awake by the alarm sirens of the van. All of the motion lights are on and the flashing lights of the van alarm are filling my room. I left the key fob upstairs in the main part of the house, so I run upstairs to silence the alarm. In the kitchen, as I'm grabbing the fob, my grandfather in his boxers, my great-grandmother in her nightgown, and I in my boxer briefs all meet in the dark. My grandfather grunts as he sees me grabbing the fob, but what my granny said sent shivers down my spine. "What in the Sam Hill are you doing running around outside at this time of night, darling?" I wasn't outside. I explained that I was sleeping and she insisted that I was outside making the van alarm. My great-grandmother's bedroom sits above the garage doors looking down over the driveway and the van. I'm assuming she's confused. She has Alzheimer's after all. The goosebumps from her exclamation prompted me to grab a knife from the butcher block anyway, and my grandfather followed with a baseball bat. We both walk outside warily in our boxers, in the cold but highly illuminated dead of night. The van is still going crazy. The interior lights are all flashing. I remember that specifically because I'd never seen a car alarm do that. We silence the alarm and I start looking around. My grandfather says he thinks a deer may have run out of the woods in the dark and hit the van. I don't say anything as we investigate. When I reach the back of the van, I notice the door is wide open. That explains the alarm. The van has a feature that if the vehicle alarm is armed and a door is open somehow, from inside or outside, it alarms. But how? I locked it and armed it, hence the blaring alarm. That's when I realized the door was opened from the inside. My blood ran cold. The door is open so the inside lights are still on. I see the empty space behind the row of seats and there are wadded up napkins and a chip bag. They weren't ours. Someone was in the van with me the entire time. I must have left the van unlocked by mistake when I went into work, and that's how Chelsea was able to get in the van without the keys by the end of the night. Was it a homeless person escaping the cold? Or someone with more sinister intent? What if I had gotten off the phone like I wanted to? If they had ill intent, the fact that I was on the phone might have saved my life, because Chelsea would have raised hell if she heard me being attacked. I get chills every time I think about it. We didn't call the police because my grandfather was skeptical of my conclusion, but my gut tells me I didn't drive home alone that night. My New Year resolution 2012 was to get back in shape again. After my first kid was born, I had lost my athletic interest, but I had every intention of getting it back. So I started running 4 days a week with my friend Hannah, who was a great runner and motivator. We would run after work, 5 to 10 kilometers, usually favoring the forest trail. It's the kind of trail that has lighting in the darker months of the year, so you can run there anytime. Once you turn on the lights, you have 45 minutes to run the shorter trails and longer to run the longer ones. Then the lights shut off automatically. We had been running for about 2 months when we started seeing the same man hanging around the parking lot every time we got there. Thin man, 25 to 30 years of age, always dressed in sports clothes but never actually running. He never looked you in the eye either. We speculated that he could be homeless camping nearby because he was constantly there. We got used to seeing him, sitting somewhere close by, silently and always on his own. We felt sorry for him. He never seemed to talk to anyone or interact at all, but there was something about him that made us hesitate to talk to him or ask if he was okay. Can't pinpoint what it was, but something wasn't completely right with him. One evening, Hannah didn't make it to our run and I decided to go on my own. I arrived at the parking lot, my car being the only car there. I did some stretching, turned on the lights, and set off on the 5-kilometer trail. I hadn't seen the thin, silent man when I started my run. Perhaps it was getting too cold to sit there now that it was autumn, dark, and getting closer to the freezing point. He must have been there though, somewhere in the shadows, because when I got to the top of the first steep hill, I could hear heavy breathing somewhere behind me. I look over my shoulder and I see him. He is running like a man obsessed. In regular shoes, not running shoes, with his arms moving in a really strange, stiff manner, as if he was made of metal. His hands like arrows, straight and in an upward-inward angle. Sort of like a sprinter, but more extreme, moving like a robot. For the first time I've seen him, he looked me straight in the eyes, and it was the eyes of a predatory animal, and it made my heart freeze. He had never done anything to harm me or anyone else as far as I knew, but the look in his eyes alone was enough to let me know that I was facing a serious threat. I started running faster, trying to create distance between us, and I could hear his heavy breathing getting even more strained. I ran like my life depended on it, adrenaline pumping through my body and giving me new strength. I tore off my necklace and threw it on the ground, thinking, I must leave a trace if he takes me. Something must be left behind. I tried screaming, hoping somebody would be close enough to hear me, but I couldn't scream my lungs out and keep up the pace at the same time. Why is he doing this? What does he want? Who is he? I thought as I started to feel my lungs burn. Then I thought of my 15-month-old daughter and ran until I could taste blood in my mouth. He was still behind me, maybe 100 meters behind now, but I figured that if I trip and fall, or run out of energy, or fumble with the car keys once I reach the parking lot, then I'm screwed. So once I reached the sharp turn on the trail, I went off the trail and ran straight into the dark woods. I ran only a short distance, and then I laid down flat on my stomach, my hands searching for a rock to defend myself with if he found me. I realized that I was wearing bright running clothes with reflexes and neon coloring. I had never felt so visible in the dark before. I could hear him reach the turn and, thank God, keep on running. I started to slowly, and as silently as possible, move further into the darkness. My heart sank again as soon as I heard rapid footsteps coming in from the trail. He had realized that I must have gone off the trail once he saw that there was no sign of me ahead. He stopped, and I stopped. I could only imagine him listening for any sound, and I held my breath and begged God I don't believe in to make him go away. After a while, I heard him say something in a language I didn't recognize and walk off. I didn't move. I feared that he would wait for me by the car and realized that I had to get off the trail and onto the main road and stop someone. I couldn't go back to the parking lot. I started to make my way further into the woods, knowing that I would eventually end up on the last part of the long trail and close to the main road. The lights on the trail suddenly shut off. That made me calmer at first. The dark was a comfort and protection, but then, after only a few moments, it switched on again. This could mean that another person had just started the run, and soon I would have someone there to help me, or that he was out there looking for me, or getting ready to prey on another lonely runner. I decided against waiting to find out, and continued my way towards the main road. It was dark and I fell multiple times, my clothes getting wet from the damp vegetation, and I started to get cold. After what felt like a lifetime, I could see the 10-kilometer trail ahead and knew I was close to the main road. Soon I could hear the traffic. Once I made it to the road, I must have looked like I had been in a terrible accident. Blood from several small cuts from the falling, my clothes dirty, and my face, I assume, petrified. My bright runner shirt soon attracted to the attention of a passing car. My waving and desperate shouting made it stop. The driver, a 40-ish man with his 2 kids in the back seat, spent the next 10 minutes or so trying to make sense of what I tried to say between the sobbing and the crying. He asked if I wanted a lift back to the parking lot, and I told him no. Please take me home instead. At home, my husband insisted on going to the parking lot to retrieve the car and calling the police. And report what? I asked. No crime had been committed. I just knew that he was out to get me. My husband went back for the car. The driver's seat window was smashed and my phone was gone. So was the photo of my daughter that I had been hanging from the mirror. I don't know what he was trying to do, or why he chased me the way he did, but the look in his eyes, there was no doubt he had bad intentions. I live in a small town. You blink and you miss it. The best we can boast about is a single stop sign and a gas station which we only have because of the nearby highway. Any actual semblance of a town is 25 minutes away. So when things get scary out here, it's amplified. The occasional homeless person is no big deal. They're often drifting through. Drug addicts run rampart and will steal everything they can from your house, but it's the normal out here. However, what happened a few years ago certainly wasn't normal. Originally, I was dead asleep in my bed. I only woke up because it was burning hot in my room, but it was summertime and not much I could do. I just remember tossing and turning until I got a creepy feeling that fell into the pit of my stomach. I glanced over to the bathroom door that was open with the light on. Everything was normal. I left the light on so I wouldn't trip and die if I had to pee in the middle of the night. Next, I glanced at the window directly across from my bed. I had no curtains, but I did have a bad set of blinds. Part of the blinds are broken from wear and tear, and the crappy AC output beneath it would make them move back and forth so you'd get a glimpse outside every so often. The yard light was still going, but what made me stop was the outline at my window. The figure of someone was directly at my window, almost like it was waiting for the blinds to move to watch me. I didn't have an imagination as a child, that had been trained out of me, but the sight was enough to pour every horror film into my head at that moment. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled my blankets over my head and slept in a cloth oven that night. By morning time, the figure was gone. I remember running to my mom's room on the verge of tears in the morning, telling her what happened. She laughed at me like I was an idiot and told me it was probably just a stray cat that had climbed up there for one odd reason or another. I almost believed her since my window was pretty high off the ground, but something didn't sit right. Later that day when we were doing yard work, I glanced over my window and saw one of our metal patio chairs had been pushed up to it. I pointed it out to my mom, who proceeded to chew me out. "That's how the cat probably got up there, moron. Stop leaving furniture everywhere." But I hadn't moved it. It was heavy enough that I struggled with it, so we moved it back and so began a pattern. At night, I'd see the figure, complain to my mom, and we'd find a chair moved back every single morning. This went on for a few weeks. My mother stopped caring about my concerns until one morning we saw where the outside screen of my window had been sliced open. I still remember her shaking her head and complaining about those damn stray cats that we still had yet to see. I could tell she was unnerved by that development. I couldn't handle it anymore, and I opted to sleep in our living room that night. The only problem was, our kitchen and living room connected, which meant there was always several windows. The first night of my move went well, despite my back hurting from the couch. I avoided my room like the plague. It wasn't until about 4 days later we ran into an issue. I woke up and glanced at the clock above the fireplace. It read a little past 3 a.m. I couldn't realize why I'd woken up until it happened again. There was a beam of light shining in from the kitchen window, almost like someone was shining a flashlight in. I saw it trace along the walls and land on the love seat across from the couch I was on. I was mortified. When I told my mom, she continued to laugh at me. I gave in and decided I would sleep in my dad's room, even though it had a gigantic window. He slept in the recliner with a huge TV, so I felt more safe having someone around. The yard light was directly outside the window always. Anyways, it seemed foolproof. That was until I woke up out of habitual fear and watched through the window across from the bed. Everything seemed normal as time dragged on, and I felt like a moron. Maybe my mom was right. That was until I saw a lone figure come out of the woods by the backyard shed, walk directly under the light, and head to the patio furniture like he'd been there plenty of times before. I still remember the large build the man had, and the confidence like he was the one who lived here and wasn't creeping around my yard in the dead of night. I just remember listening to the TV until I fell asleep again, hoping to get another glimpse. My dad would have been pissed if I had woken him up. He was grumpy on a good day and terrifying on a bad day. I didn't feel like risking it unless I had solid proof because I was scared. The next morning, my mom chewed me out again for the patio furniture, which was routine almost a month later. But this time, something new happened. She demanded I stop playing in the toolboxes of the garage. A bunch of tools had been taken out and left on our doorstep. Screwdrivers, a large hammer, flashlights, etc. It wasn't me. I begged with my mom and pleaded with her, just stay up with me one night. We couldn't close our garage because it was an open carport, and I wasn't going to get my butt beaten for touching tools because of someone else. It was driving me mad. Finally, she agreed. That night, we would stay awake in the living room. I finally fell asleep before my mom did, but I remember her waking me up in a panic. She pointed to the window that overlooked our garage. We could see the top of someone's head as they walked back and forth. There was a sound of someone placing metal tools down on the brick steps, as if they were trying to be quiet but couldn't fully muffle it. She whispered for me to go wake my dad. My dad was angry having been woken up in the middle of the night by his frantic daughter. He grabbed his pistol and headed out from the back door towards the front of the house where the garage was located. We heard my dad screaming and someone dropping tools, then the shot of a gun twice. The frantic footsteps pounding out of the garage felt like they were coming from my chest. My mom peeked out the window and then opened the door, and my dad stumbled in. He had missed both shots because of his unstable aim, but told us that there was a man crouching at our front door looking at our door handle. None of us slept that night, and in the morning the law from the closest town arrived. They didn't do much besides ask if anything had been stolen, for a description of the man, and then told us to install cameras. That was it. They said the guy was probably just looking for something easy to steal for quick money. But if that had been the case, why hadn't he stolen the tools, the generator, the welder, or broken into any of the vehicles just sitting in the garage? And why would he watch me while I sleep? We finally set up hunting trail cameras around the house, but nothing has happened since. Coming home from college for holidays, I still have nightmares about the incident years later when I sleep in my own bed. We still don't know what he was looking for, or why he did the things that he did. I'm an overnight security guard for a large building parking ramp. It's generally a really quiet job with a lot of free time, but occasionally I do have to kick out homeless people. It's a horrible part of the job, and I do my best to direct them to the next safest place to sleep. Most people are understanding as they unfortunately go through this a lot. If anything, they want to vent, and I try to be an open ear. Our protocol is to ask them to leave, then if they don't, tell them to leave, and if all else fails, we have to contact police. I've only once gotten to that last step. It's important to note my general routine at work. I sit in the shack in the parking ramp for an hour, then I go for a walk around the building, and then back to the shack. The doors are all locked, but there's an entryway with an ATM that's open 24/7. This is usually where I find people looking for a place to sleep. For more context, I'm a smaller woman and unarmed. On this night, there was a woman trying to sleep by the ATM. I followed protocol, and after the first 2 warnings, I had to contact police. She yelled at me, which is out of the normal but understandable considering her position. It must be frustrating being constantly kicked out of every semi-safe place. Police arrived, and because I was a little scared, I always am, I watched from inside the building out of view to make sure they got her out. If she was yelling at me, she was full on screaming at them. This goes on for about half an hour before she leaves the building. Unfortunately, that's all the cops are required to do. So she makes her way to the bus stop right outside. The problem with this is that the bus stop is parallel to my shack. She just sits there and stares at me with hatred in her eyes. This gets uncomfortable pretty quickly, so I decide to take another walk around the building. When I'm passing the door that leads to my shack, I decide to take a quick peek out of the little door window. I don't usually do this, but I felt uneasy knowing she was probably still in the area, and it's a good thing I did. I can just barely see it, but behind my shack, I see the slightest wobble. There she was, hiding right behind my shack. It's not a big thing, maybe a 10-foot cube made of large windows and metal right at the entrance of the parking ramp. I have no doubt she was waiting for me. I call the police and just keep watching from the little door window. While I'm waiting, she eventually lets out an angry scream, kicks the miscellaneous junk in front of the shack, and storms up the stairwell in the parking ramp. For an extra kick of anxiety, the floor above me had a broken door that wasn't locked at the time. Eventually police get there, and after some harsh words they get her to leave again, and this time she walks off into the night. What really scares me was what I found on my next walk. There's a mirror next to the door I was watching her from. I couldn't see it from the outside, but from the inside it was obvious. She had broken the mirror and a large piece was missing. Maybe I've allowed my anxiety to build this all up in my head, but from my perspective she had taken a large, sharp object, hid behind my shack, and waited for me to walk up. You tell me if I'm overreacting, but to my nameless potential assailant, I wish you better times and a bed to sleep in, but I also hope we never meet again.